So, with all the Raids 3 controversy lately, I've been doing something that is admittedly very stupid and browsing my Twitter timeline. Lots of people are saying drops are too common, lots of people are saying keep it the way it is, lots of people thinking that they're the sharpest tool in the shed because they know the words sample size and bias. I'm going to try and cover the most common debates and opinions of what's going on, while adding my own perspective on the situation and how I feel it could be fixed if not mitigated. Now, obviously, this will be a largely subjective piece, and not everything I say needs to be implemented like it's the hand of God, but I think there's value in getting the opinion out there, especially if I know that it's shared by many. So, problems. Raids 3's got a lot of them. I think the content itself is good. A couple tweaks I will cover later, but in large part, the raid is fun, the mechanics are fun, I love the chest room, it's sick. Most of the problems associated with Raids 3 are contextual. The most obvious and the most objective is poor server performance. It's obvious enough that I won't spend too long covering it, but many worlds with more than 400 players have 1 to 2 tick delays, which is ridiculous given that the world is meant to hold 2,000 players. People not even doing TOA are suffering because of it, because whether you're at Bandos, Inferno, or Chambers, it's a problem for everyone and jagex knows it. Modash recently tweeted about upcoming server maintenance to try and combat this. Now, it's a shame that it didn't happen before Raids 3, but I don't think a single JMod that we know publicly is to blame for this. Blame the higher-ups and move on with it, because if I'm honest, there's not much we can do here. Complaining to Modash over Twitter isn't going to solve the problem. So, drop rates and accessibility. I'll cover the most glaring first, but namely, why are drops feasibly obtainable from entry mode raids? This is a core problem, and long before the update hit, most of the high-end and even many early and mid-game players I knew thought this was a stupid decision. The Lightbearer and the Fang are the two main things that you can get from entry mode, and they're both endgame class items. The Lightbearer restores spec twice as fast, it's got incredible use in all 3 raids, regardless of whether or not you're speedrunning. And with a bit of foresight, anyone could see how this could be a useful item in very many scenarios. The Fang is just as good. It outclasses current best-in-slot items for solo CM, and it outclasses Z Spear on Corp, which is specifically what it's designed for, and it's by far the best-in-slot for Nex, which means it's also tied to how easily you can obtain Torva, ZCB, and Vambraces, all of which are also current best-in-slot items. It's good on anything where defense is high, making it incredibly versatile. These best-in-slot items are obtainable for entry mode, a mode so easy that players are consistently clearing it from a mid-game level. You could be 100 combat with like a Zami Hasta, a Dragon Dagger, and a standard Trident. Look, I'm not here to say that only players in the most elite clans should be able to grind out the new drops. What I'm saying is, you can't make endgame best-in-slot items available in the middle of the game and then call it good game design. It's like if Sang staffs dropped from gargoyles, why would I ever kill Krakens for a Trident? You don't intentionally make endgame items available to mid-game players. And yet despite this, entry mode still has a viable chance of receiving far best-in-slot items. It doesn't make sense, and it negatively impacts the players who can clear on normal and expert modes. It's so weird because it's not even like players are camping entry mode to try and get drops. Most players are doing entry mode to practice and learn so that they can do normal mode. Like, I don't think anybody's getting upset that they're not getting purples on fucking entry mode where your hand's being held the whole time. But people are definitely getting upset that you're crashing the price of light bears just so you can give one to Timmy Turner doing an entry mode run. Most players can clear normal mode, and if they can't do it right now, well, they'll practice for a day in entry mode and then they'll be able to do it just fine. It's not like this is a very hard requirement to reach. The biggest obstacle for players is literally just getting the gear, which is how it's supposed to be. It's an endgame raid that gives endgame items. In progression-based games like RuneScape, you don't stick Torva at the early section of the game, because then there's nowhere to go after. You've already hit the pinnacle. Letting players earn decently high-level gear before they can get endgame drops is perfectly fine. Sticking the Fang and the Lightbearer from entry mode is not fine. As mentioned before, there's a reason that you're not getting Sang staffs off of gargoyles. Now, something I've heard people say is that you're not supposed to grind entry modes for it, it's just rarer there. to which I'd say that's just stupid. The second it was considered viable, that put the drop rate range within about 1 in 100. This raid was the biggest PVM release in the past 4 years. They knew everyone would try their hand at it, and naturally that means entry mode is going to get tens of thousands of completions within just the first day. Someone would have to be incredibly ignorant to not realize that. So let's scrap this 1 in 100 drop rate. Let's say that it's 1 in 1,000 to get something off of entry mode. On day 1, 10 items would have come into the game literally on the day of release just through entry mode. Do you have any idea what that does to the price and the hype of a drop? For now, we'll ignore the fact that people were getting it commonly from regular raids, but 10 fangs or 10 light bearers on day 1 instantly makes it irrelevant. People notice that you're getting it from entry mode and then they instinctively think, wow, normal mode is going to be shitting them out. The price instantly crashes. The light bearer and the fang are both endgame items, both of which can be used in the raid to make more money more efficiently. And guess what? I bought a light bearer on day 3 for 50 mil. The same price as an Avernic Defender hilt, which has been in the game for 4 years. The fang is hovering between 250 and 300 mil, which is about 1.5 times the price of a rapier, which by the way has also been in the game for 4 years. I don't think I need to say this, but it is not a good sign when endgame items that have been in the game for 4 days are the same price as items that have been in the game for 4 years. Now I've had someone come up to me and say, well, prices don't matter, the item is valuable because it's useful. And although I respect your opinion, the fact of the matter is that most of the game is not Iron Man. Not only does the value of items reflect how rewarding the raid is, it also roughly depicts how easy it is to obtain. If endgame items already have a low value on release, it's not rewarding for main players to do it. And it usually means that it's incredibly easy to obtain, which reflects in the fact that within 5 hours of raid release, we were already seeing entry mode drops, including a pet. Within 48 hours, 3 people in my social circle had entry mode drops, and that doesn't even include a second pet. Oh, but that doesn't show the thousands of people that were doing entry modes and didn't get a purple. Yeah, and it also doesn't show the purples of everyone who wasn't in my social circle. Look, I'm not browsing Reddit, picking and choosing the top entry mode loots, right? This is literally my small clan, my friends, and a couple streamers that I have mutual friends with. Between this group of people, there's maybe 200 distinct entry mode KCs, and that's being really generous. Well, that sample size is too small, maybe you just got lucky. Okay. Let's say that the drop rate is 1 in 1,000, which, by the way, is already way more common than it should be for entry mode. The odds of hitting 4 drops in 200 kills is 0.00005%. I think it's safe to say the drop rate is more common than 1 in 1,000. And that, in and of itself, is the problem. Let's say that up to this moment, these prices weren't already terrible. We're less than a week in. What happens a month down the line, a year down the line? Should I just be prepared to buy light bearers for the price of an arcane? This decision to give purples in entry mode shows little to no regard for longevity in this game. It's almost as dumb as the decision to make prayer scrolls 8 times as common as their original rate only 1 month into the release of Chambers of Xeric. And look at how that one turned out, right? For the past 2 years, the highest level mage prayer cost the same price as the seeds I used during a herb run. The only justifiable rate at which purple should be coming into the game through entry mode is at least 1 in 50,000. Anything less than that and you've significantly impacted the market for items on the day of release. You're making everyone doing normal mode suffer just so a couple guys who are still trying to practice mechanics can get a drop. Purples shouldn't come from entry mode. They don't in TOB and they shouldn't from TOA. You want to fix the problem, either get rid of them or make them insanely rare. Because whatever rate you've put on them, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, I mean, it's pretty safe to assume it doesn't even approach 1 in 1,000, but even if it was, it's not rare enough. Because if it is 1 in 1,000, we're on day 5, and on average, 160 items would have come into the game just through entry mode alone. There's nothing to say here except get rid of them. So now that we're done talking about entry mode, we can touch on the more controversial topic of expert and normal modes. Now, much of the problems here are just associated with balancing, so first we'll touch on balancing the drop rates. There's a ton of debate on people saying, oh, well, you shouldn't get drops if you can't clear this, or, oh, your gear looks like shit, I can't believe you're getting a staff. Personally, I don't really care about that. There's no point in discriminating based on what gear you have or whatever. If you can clear the required difficulty, you should earn the chance at a drop. Now the problem is, the base drop rate for standard difficulty appears to be too high. I can literally hear the sounds of 500 Twitter and Reddit keyboard warriors who got the highest mark in their 5th grade math class now telling me, typing up a storm, "Durr, you have a small and biased sample size. You're not allowed to make claims on what is probable." It's like, yes, you're right. Everyone is right. The sample size is small. Yes, it is biased. Everybody already fucking knew that. Stop going around and talking down to people thinking they don't have a basic grasp of high school statistics. Across prolonged periods of time, your margin of error is going to decrease. Is anyone here going to argue that the drop rate of a purple on 150 to 250 is somewhere between 1 in 10 and maybe 1 in 20? Probably not. General consensus among the groups I've rated with, the groups I've spoken to, all reached something like this rating. Between all of us, there's maybe about 500 KC. That is a small and biased sample size, but I'm willing to bet none of you are really going to contest it, because guess what? It probably lines up with your experiences as well. You can get the gist of someone's experiences through their impressions, and make no mistake, of course it's going to be biased, but it'll give you an approximation, and that can at least point us in the direction of what the actual drop rate is. And we can do the exact same thing for expert mode runs. Between all my friends, the groups and streamers that I talk to, there's probably 200 individual expert mode clears. Now I'm not here to speculate on the exact drop rate for expert mode, but the main thing we have to prove is that it needs to be significantly better than normal mode, right? But across that small and yes, biased sample size, not a single person that I spoke to felt like expert mode adequately compensated them for running it. If I'm honest, most of them feel like the drop rate is worse than regulars instead. But we'll give jagex the benefit of the doubt here and say that we're just getting unlucky, the drop rate is actually mildly higher than normals instead. Well, in this case, the degree of which you have to be unlucky for every single person to see expert as unviable is nothing short of suspicious. Let's say that everybody in Oblivion and some of the people in Sanity and some of my friends in Vintage, as well as all the streamers running expert modes, are simply on an unlucky streak, and they're not receiving enough drops to be noticeably different from normal mode. In that case, their suspicions are still valid. Sometimes you hit a 3% false positive, a 5% false positive. It's rare, but it does happen. And when it does happen, you are justified in being suspicious, because it's a 3% chance, it's a 5% chance. If it happens, it happens, right? Some dude came up to me and said, "Yeah, I got a 1 KC Dragon Warhammer. You get lucky, it happens." It's like, this has to be one of the most stupid rebuttals I've ever heard. Obviously you can get lucky, but if you get 5 more back to back, you have a valid reason to be suspicious of the drop rate. 1 in 5,000, I can't believe I've just got 6 in a row. That must be a 1 in 50 billion chance, right? And this is even more so the case when the base drop rate for TOA is already so low. If normal 150s have a 1 in 15 drop rate, and expert completions are supposed to be even better than that, the expected variance across 200 or 300 completions is comparatively low. This is why when you go 8,000 dry of a Dragon Warhammer, you're not technically as unlucky as just going 50 dry at TOB. For the vast majority of people running expert mode to feel like it's not worthwhile, this raises a major red flag, and it tells us that something is very likely wrong. Now, obviously there are extraneous factors. Maybe someone miscounted their completions. Maybe you forgot a purple. Maybe you hyped up your drop rate more than it actually was. Of course, there are going to be factors that are going to influence our perception, but people are justified in having their own suspicions. If it's really just a false positive, then it sucks, but it doesn't change the fact that many people have a valid reason to be suspicious. This is especially the case given that jagex doesn't always post about their revisions to the game. People seem to think that they can't just tweak things and not make an announcement about it. It's like they do this all the time. Red Crabs and TOB were pulled to have their damage count towards the MVP points in the raid. They made that change ages ago, confirmed by the mods themselves, and they never put the revision in any news post. You can find the original poll in question, but in no game update do they ever announce that they made the change. They just did it under the radar. There is a literal clip of Travis42 killing someone on a PvP world inside the next room, and it counted as a PVM death. But a week later they changed it so it's just a regular PvP death inside the room on a PvP world. There's no note of it in any news post whatsoever. So one guy's team went in thinking that they were safe, and guess what? They lost all their gear when they got killed. It's funny, but it's stupid that jagex doesn't say a word about it. The point that I'm getting at with this is that some people just think, oh, well, they'll show us the drop rate and that'll tell us what the drop rate was this whole time. And it's like, no, there's nothing to say that they haven't made changes to it. Whether it's to accommodate for release week or whatever, sometimes it's justified, but they do have a history of just making updates and not making announcements about it. So the problem here is expert mode does not properly incentivize players enough to do it. Well, here lies a problem that ties into the other modes as well. The fact of the matter is currently base 150 Invocation has too high of a drop rate to allow any room for expert to be further incentivized. Assuming we have a 1 in 15 approximate drop rate for base 150 Invocation, there's no room for expert mode to increase its drop rate without flooding the market. We can have a challenge mode and a hard mode top situation with the kits, but those kits aren't even out yet, so it's pretty much irrelevant right now. It's also not great to just have people only doing expert mode for the cosmetics, or else you end up with a hard mode top situation where it's better to really just camp the regulars for money and leave hard mode as soon as you get your kits in dust. Ideally, Invocations will scale more linearly with drop rate, with 150 receiving a significant nerf compared to its current rate, and then scaling back up as you increase. Some people also suggest reducing Missouri and staff drop rates, or just completely locking them out until you hit certain thresholds. Personally, I have no qualms about it, but in the same way that you can receive a scythe or a bow from regular raids, I don't really see why a staff needs to be locked behind expert mode specifically, instead of just having more purples at the higher raid level. As it currently stands, there is no room to have expert mode be properly incentivized without either nerfing current drop rates at the 150 level, or flooding the market by basically making experts like 1 in 5, which by the way is stupid, so please just nerf the 150 and then scale the invocations accordingly. The next list of problems can all briefly be summarized as improper balancing of difficulty. First is the concept of balancing invocations. I'm going to be perfectly honest, some of the invocations are just poorly weighted. I can do a 300 run pretty comfortably with certain invocations, and I can also get completely mauled by a 150 if I put all the wrong invocations on. Some of them are just way more difficult than their associated values, and that's part of what's led to the perception of TOA being so easy on release compared to its predecessors. Now, I don't want to fault jagex too much for this. I can imagine it's very difficult to properly QA some invocations, and to properly assess what value each one should have, I don't even want to imagine how much work goes into that. But the fact of the matter is, if I want to ruin my day, I can simply turn on all the Pathfinder, Pathseeker, Pathwalker options. I can completely remove any raid potions that I get from the Helpful Spirit, and I can reduce the effectiveness of Zebak's Jugs of Water just to piss myself off. I'm gonna hate my life doing that raid, and it'll probably only be weighted at about 200 something invocation. Meanwhile, I can have fucking bananas and 3 blood spawns that die halfway before they get to me on the croc, and I'll farm my way to 300 rating. Invocation values are so poorly balanced right now, and that's part of why so many players are saying it's just easy to do 150s and 200s. It's because you don't have any hard invocations on. Combined with the fact that it's basically the best drop rate you're going to get, you've somehow turned a customizable raid with varying difficulty and turned it into a bland and dull raid where everybody's only doing the same invocations, everybody's only doing the same raiding, and nobody has any needs or incentives to push their own limits or challenge themselves for it. Rebalance certain invocations to give less rating and give other invocations more rating, and then finally reassess the drop rates at the new values to see if you can still continuously farm high drop rate runs without having any difficult invocations on. I'll tell you right now, any of the Pathseeker ones and the ones that reduce your supplies from the Helpful Spirit are not worth whatever rating they currently have. Many players can reach whatever desired invocation level that they want, and they'll never even bother touching those invocations because they're clearly the hardest difficulty ones, and they don't even give that much rating for it. You're not going to find anyone doing expert mode runs with 33% supplies from the Spirit, or fucking fighting level 6 Zebak. You know, like, make those invocations more rewarding for their trouble, and make it so you can't just get crazy good drop rates without having at least some difficult invocations on. The second aspect of balancing difficulty are the supplies that you're receiving mid-raid. Smelling salts are borderline necessities for the raid, and ambrosia is so strong that people are literally dropping memes on it left and right. Within the first 2 hours of release, people on Bodhi's team were already talking about how ridiculously strong ambrosia is. Now, I don't care about the strength of these potions. Ambrosia's cool, and it makes you try and dance on a knife's edge to get the most use out of it. Overloads are a great mechanic, making you not sip as many restores constantly, while also having some skill in balancing your brew timing for maximum DPS. The problem here is that jagex intended for a choice to be made at the Spirit. Power is obviously the offensive option to pick, life being the survival option, and chaos being a balance between the two. Now, unfortunately, they've stuck ambrosia in power and chaos, and this completely removes the need for any choice whatsoever. If I get 2 doses of ambrosia and they heal me from 10 to 125 HP, I'm basically getting 4 brews by taking a single ambrosia potion. If power has both the overloads and the ambrosia, for what reason would I ever pick anything else? There's no choice to be made if power gives me ambrosia, and I get the overloads too. I'm going power almost every raid. Life is quite literally dead content, because why should I have to worry about brewing down when I can just heal 100 HP in 1 sip of ambrosia? Sometimes people literally just face tank the last phase of the Wardens because no prayer, no movement, it doesn't matter, I can just out heal it with ambrosia. Having ambrosia paired with chaos and power is just a bad balancing decision, even if it is a really fun one. If it were to be properly balanced, ambrosia should only ever be obtainable from the life choice, and more overloads could be offered from the power choice in order to compensate for it. This way you could have different members picking different choices in order to make up for each other's shortcomings. Balancing team sizes. Now, I've seen a little bit of debate on whether or not soloing should be as prominent as it is for TOA. Personally, I think it's better to have the choice to solo, with teams being the slight meta. Personally, I feel like when solos are more efficient, you make players feel like they're giving up something in order to play with their friends. On the other hand, if teams are slightly better, I feel like solo players are usually just happy to take a minor dip in efficiency just so that they don't have to go through the effort of like finding a team and stuff. If I'm just going off of what jagex originally said, it sounded like solo was to be feasible but not meta, so my assumption is they wanted it to be something like Chambers of Xeric, which I personally thought was a pretty good target in mind. Currently, that doesn't appear to be the case though, because solos are just simply easier. In solos, there's no coordination required, and most of the bosses have a few mechanics that were specifically designed with team coordination in mind. Baba's Rocks, Baba's Puzzle, Kefri's Puzzle, Kefri's Swarms, Aka's Detonation, Zebak's Blood Magic, all of those need coordination in teams that you can just ignore in a solo. Not to mention the scaling is similar enough that you can still 2-phase the Warden and like 5-hit it with a T-bow anyway, so it's not like you're really losing anything to scaling. Needless to say, it does feel like solos are usually easier than the other scales. There are a few exceptions here and there, but I think if they wanted to tone down the scaling, I'd say some of the HP should just be scaled a little bit up to make up for the lack of coordination. But personally, I don't really care if they tweak solos or not. That's just something I wanted to touch on because I know there's a lot of people talking about it. So in balancing difficulty, we've already discussed about how the raid can get too easy because the invocations are poorly weighted. But personally, I feel like the opposite is true as well. I know a lot of friends and acquaintances that consider the final boss to be way too easy after a few completions. Now keep in mind, here's where I think I'll be discussing more personal gripes with the content, and as always, this should be taken with a bit of a grain of salt. Now, some people are going to look at us and say, oh, well, you're a dirty gatekeeper, you're elitist. It's like, no, dude, I don't care whether you can do it or not. You know, I'm not trying to stop you from being able to do it. I literally just mean that after you do like 20 runs, overclocked 1 and 2 don't feel difficult, especially compared to when you first started, right? And insanity is definitely not that insane. I'm not here to say that everything needs to be harder, right? The whole selling point of TOA is that you can choose the difficulty that you want. But I think that TOA release could have definitely benefited from having some final invocation that was meant to be uncompletable for days, weeks, in the same way that RS3 had the race to complete Telos on the 10,000 in rage or whatever it was. TOA should have strived to have a difficult final invocation that was meant to be an insurmountable task. In the same way that everyone was cheering Bodhi's team on during TOB release, waiting to see who would get the first completion. In the same way that everyone would hop from V the Victim stream to Wooks' stream to Bodhi's stream during the Inferno release. There is great hype in having a challenge that's almost incompletable sitting at the end of the tunnel, and to have all of our greatest players racing to see who would be the first to beat it. That is literally what Wooks is here for on the release of these big updates, and it just wasn't like that this time. Like, he got one of the first solo expert completions, it wasn't that hard for him, and then he just kept doing standard expert money raids. You see, when I read the description for the Insanity invocation, I thought, wow, there's gonna be like 2 wardens attacking me. I'm gonna have to flick all 4 demi-bosses. I have to react to what side the warden's gonna attack at, instead of having just a fixed pattern every time. The obelisk is gonna hit 10s on me instead of 3s. I thought it was going to be untouchable for the first week. And then I actually saw it, and it just started hitting faster, and that was it. I thought that they were going to add mechanics and add to the boss fight. Instead, all we got was the boss attacking faster and slightly less margin for error. I'm not here to tell you that Insanity is piss easy, because you really can wipe at the drop of a hat. But it definitely doesn't have the hype that a final boss should have. Especially when you consider that this whole raid's selling point is that you choose the difficulty. You should be able to choose a difficulty that's so high it's not even reasonable for you to complete it unless you're the best in the game. Sure, you could argue that completing the raid with the most invocations and the highest rating is a difficult challenge, but the problem with that is it's no longer about defeating one insanely difficult challenge anymore. It's really just an endurance test where you have to fight 5 tanky, really high defense bosses and you have no resupplies. One is just way more hype than the other, and I think that's part of why Wooks isn't even trying to run for highest invocation clear. Not having a final challenge just really seemed lackluster to me, and I've heard the same opinion from a lot of my friends. The bright side is I do think they can add future invocations which could introduce that sort of challenge, but I think that the best time to do it was probably on release. If they do decide to drop it, I don't know if it's ever going to be as hype as it would have been had they just came out on release with it. If they want, they could introduce these mechanics piece by piece instead of all in one invocation too. If there is one thing that makes the wardens too easy, it's the fact that they always pummel the ground in the same order. You could have a separate invocation that adds more demi-bosses, you could have another invocation that makes the wardens pummel in a random order, you could have another invocation that just makes it so both wardens are alive during the second phase. Hell, you could even have an invocation that makes the obelisk do more damage. There's a ton of different ways that they could have made an ultimate final boss, and I think that a lot of endgame players would have preferred to have the option to fight something like that. Other issues include the lack of invocation presets, which I know pisses off a lot of people. Every time the raid leader switches, invocations get messed up and everybody gets annoyed, you have to remake a party. It's like, it seems like presets should have been something that the team should have thought about by now, but for all we know, maybe they're working on it already. I'd say it's pretty big quality of life, so they should probably get to that. It's also a bit odd that the puzzle rooms have somewhat of a fixed difficulty. The NPCs during Kefri's puzzle room are never more than annoying. Originally, I thought they might scale up with HP or damage based on your scale or invocation, kind of like the baboons during Baba's puzzle room, but it's not like that. Kefri's agile bugs don't do anything either. I thought that it would have had something to do with an invocation, but Maybe it's just an invocation I haven't used yet, but it feels like they're pretty useless, and if they don't do anything, then I don't really know why they're there. I've spoken to a lot of people, and most people consider volatile baboons just budget Nihilicus. General rule of thumb, if I'm describing a mechanic as a budget version of another mechanic you've already used, it's not a good sign. I think it would introduce more skill if volatile baboons had an extra square of damage radius instead of its current 3x3, but also I wish they damaged other baboons when they blew up. I feel like that would have made the room a lot more interesting and it would have led to a higher skill ceiling. Overall, these are probably the most glaring issues I've noticed with Raids 3. Maybe I'm forgetting something, I just kind of wrote this all on a notepad and I'm winging it a little bit, but I feel like that covers most of the big things. There's always going to be smaller issues too that I'm not bringing up, but I'd be happy if they could just address the big ones for now because the smaller ones are obviously less important. As always, this is an opinion piece. Jagex doesn't have to implement or even listen to anything I say, and if you don't agree with what I have to say, then hopefully you'll provide some sort of reasoning for it. I mean, really, you can do whatever you want. You can make your own video too, for all I care. I mean, part of why I made this video is because JMods have literally said they wanted more players to share their thoughts in videos. I mean, hopefully they watch this video, listen to some thoughts. Even if they don't implement anything that I've said, as long as they listen to the concerns and the reasoning, then I'm cool with it. So, that's about it, yeah.